Good morning, everyone. It is just about 8:40 in the morning on August 25th, 2019, and we are continuing our Chord Mojo versus AudioQuest Dragonfly Cobalt comparison. Yesterday, we compared the bass response on these two devices. The video before that was about volume and soundstage, and then the one before that was simply the test parameters. But today, we're getting into the mids. Let's talk about the vocals on these two devices. Now, before we start, we know for a fact at this point, after all these videos, that the Chord Mojo has a much more closed off, more intimate, more warm presence throughout the frequency range. And what we're trying to figure out is if that is beneficial or not beneficial to a particular song. And that really comes down to taste and preference. So instead of actually saying, I prefer this over that, what the whole testing parameter is to listen to both back and forth, A and B, and then say what we do hear or do not hear between the two, and leave it up to you, the individuals who are considering these two devices, to figure out whether that's the type of sound signature or details you want or don't want. We have both devices plugged into an AB switch. The Cobalt is plugged into a USB 3.0 port. The Mojo is plugged into a USB 3.0, although it's not USB 3.0 compliant, but it is receiving data. Let's get to the test playlist. We're going to test 4 songs today: Want You Back, Heartbreak, Superposition, and a new one that I added, Why Am I Like This, by Orla Gartland. The playhead at the bottom is going to show the song title and also A and B. A is the Cobalt, B is the Mojo, so if you want to skip ahead or back and forth, it'll be easier for you to do that using that playhead marker at the bottom of this video. Let's get started. We have the Cobalt plugged in, currently at around 25% volume. Let's start with Want You Back. And by the way, I'm using the Allo Audio S4R reference class headphone. There's good width in this song. I would say that it's like you're sitting in a music hall, a medium-sized music hall that can seat 400 or 500 people. I'm going to increase the volume to 35%. And 35% is very comfortably loud listening volume. You have all 3 vocalists singing. You hear the primary, and I can hear the 2 backup vocalists left and right ear cup. And the backup vocalists have a slight difference in tonality. They're not exactly in sync with each other. With the entire mix play, the guitar, the piano, the drum, all of that stuff is not interfering with any portion of the mids. I hear the piano and the guitar now clearly differentiated between the two. I also hear the primary vocalist, no muddiness. There's no lingering reverberation with the guitar as it's being strummed. Or strummed? Strum or strummed. It sounds pretty clean. It's a clean presentation of the music, meaning it's more on the analytical presentation than on the warm, inviting presentation side. A lot of air in the song. No sibilance. Excellent separation of the 3 vocalists. So here's what I hear. The 3 vocalists are essentially obviously separated. Obviously separated. Doesn't make much sense. The 3 vocalists are obviously separated. You hear the primary, the 2 backup. The 2 backup are not exactly in sync, and when all 3 are singing, they're not exactly in sync either. There's just a slight hesitation amongst all of them, and you can pick that up if you pay attention. The drum, piano, and guitar Neither of those instruments interferes with the other, nor in conjunction do they interfere with the vocal. So there's great separation between the instruments, the mix of the instruments, and the mix of the vocals. And that's very important to have if you just want to listen to the song and hear the vocals and you want to enjoy the beat. Having that differentiation between the two types, the mix of the musics and the mix of the vocals, is potentially good for somebody who wants to have an ability to concentrate on one or the other. Let's listen to the Chord Mojo. And let's switch. Okay, we are switching the Mojo. We are starting at double orange, which is about 25%. It's much closer soundstage. I'm going to increase the volume. Volume is at 2 greens, the first level of green. And this seems about the same volume as 35% on the Cobalt. I could hear the two vocalists in the background. They're just a little bit harder to differentiate between the two backup vocalists. For example, in this song with the Cobalt, I could hear the two vocalists and I could say that they both have slightly different tonalities. I'm searching for that on the Mojo and I'm not finding it easily at all. In fact, I'm struggling to find it. They sound in sync. The hesitation, the slight offbeatness of their vocal is not present. The guitar also has a slightly heavier presence. It lingers just slightly longer than on the Cobalt, although it doesn't interfere with the vocals. I can hear the piano and the guitar, but it's a little harder to hear the differentiation between the two because the piano frequency and the guitar frequency start melding. At this point, all the instruments and the vocalists are going to be in the mix. I can hear the drum. I can hear the piano, and that's it. I can hear the piano and I can hear the drum. The guitar is a little lost in the mix. The vocals are coming out okay, but they seemed shoulder to shoulder with the mix, whereas on the Cobalt, the vocals seemed a little bit ahead. Oops, I just hit the microphone. The vocals seem a little bit ahead of the mix. And by a little bit ahead, I mean the vocals stood out a little bit better on the Cobalt with the entire mix playing. So what this basically means to me is that when the Mojo takes the song and produces the vocals, it's melding a lot of those frequencies. It's warmer sounding. It's more closed off. There's not enough air. Well, enough air is a subjective thing. There's not as much air as there is on the Cobalt. With that air, I think I can hear more separation with the Cobalt. I can hear the hesitation between the backup vocalists. I can hear when all three vocalists are singing that they're not entirely in sync. I can easily hear all three instruments, the piano, the guitar, the drum. But on the Mojo, it's not that way. With the entire mix in the play, I can hear the piano and I can hear the drum. That guitar is lost. It becomes muddied. The vocals come out, but once again, when all three are hard to differentiate, excuse me. And on top of that, the vocals and the instruments seem to be shoulder to shoulder, whereas on the Cobalt, the vocals stood out a little bit better. And it didn't seem as if there was a veneer, a gloss over everything of warmth, of haziness. And that's basically how I would describe it, where the Mojo has kind of a hazy appearance to the song. The Cobalt has a more clear view of the song, clear listening of the song. Okay, so let's go to Heartbreak by Chris Serro, and let's switch back to the Cobalt. We're going to leave the volume at 35% on the Cobalt, and let's play. Now, Heartbreak is one of those songs where, with the entire mix, the vocals take a back seat. That just seems to be how it's mixed. Let's see how the two devices represent that. I hear the electric guitar and the vocals, and then there's another, I think it's like a bass instrument of some sort that's coming up, or it could be a bass guitar. I think it's a bass guitar. So far, good separation, but now here's the drum, and the vocals see pretty much shoulder to shoulder with the instruments. I hear the drum very clearly, and I hear the bass guitar, and I hear the vocalist. And the vocals, it sounds like there are at least 2 to 3 vocalists. I hear the backup vocalist, and then I hear the primary vocalist. Now the entire mix is playing. I have the electric guitar, the drum, and the vocals. I hear 1, 2. So there are 2 different tonalities of the vocalist at this juncture. With the entire mix playing, the vocals do take a slightly one step back from the instrument. So if you're looking at a sound stage or a stage, you have the front of the stage, the middle of the stage, and the back of the stage. Let's say that the instruments are standing in the middle of the stage. The vocals, I would say, when everything is playing, the vocals are about a step or 2 behind or further back from you compared to the instruments. Right now, with just the drum and the vocals, I can hear multiple vocalists. When the electric guitar is playing, the vocals become a little hazy and they take a back seat several steps behind. So when the electric guitar is playing, that really just ramps up the presence of the music and ramps down or tones down the presence of the vocals. It's that electric guitar that just overpowers everything else in the mix. Now let's switch to the Mojo. Okay, switch to the Mojo and let's start again. Volume is still the first level of double green, which is about equal to 35% on the Cobalt. I hear really no real difference between the tonality of the Mojo and the Cobalt right now, but there's less air on the Mojo. It sounds more closed off. Instead of hearing multiple vocalists, what I hear right now is one vocalist and somebody copied and pasted their voice onto the track multiple times. A little too melded together. Now I hear 2 backup vocalists or 2 vocalists total, whereas on the Cobalt I heard more than 2. I hear the drum, the vocals, good enough separation that I can hear the drum and the vocals. Now the guitar is in the mix with the drum and the vocals immediately become muddied. It's not like they take a back seat. It's not only they take a back seat, but it's like their frequency is just muddied and confused and distorted, where it is literally difficult for me to understand what they're singing. So what happens is that electric guitar is, I think, about the same volume, about the same overpoweredness as in the Mojo, but that bass instrument, when it comes in, it distorts so much of the vocals that I lose out on even the slightest bit of separation that is present. With just the electric guitar and the vocals, I can hear them. But as soon as the drum comes in, the vocals are gone. I can't make out what they're singing. The problem with the Mojo, in my opinion, is that because it has this warmer presentation and a boosted bass, if the mix itself in a song has vocals that's already mixed a step or two behind the musical instruments, that bumped up bass is just going to elevate the instruments even more, especially the bass, obviously. And it's going to start distorting into the vocals so that it becomes much harder to understand what's being said. And that's the problem with the Mojo. Now, on the Cobalt, what I heard was the vocals taking a step or two behind the instruments, but I could still hear them. The Mojo, it's like somebody threw a big, thick bed comforter over the vocalist and then told them to stand somewhere in the back and sing. That's the presentation I hear. It's very unflattering to the song, in my opinion, and it just destroys that vocal portion. And I have to say that the guitar isn't particularly fantastic in the song to begin with, at least not to my ears. So when you have the guitar playing at the volume as it is, plus the bass that becomes a little too heavy, then you combine that with the closeness of the Mojo inherently. Then you combine that with the fact that the vocals are essentially muddied and distorted in this song. You get a very weird experience. But when you switch back to something else like the Cobalt, which is a cleaner presentation, all of a sudden it's like that haze disappears. It's like driving in the fog. If you've ever driven in thick fog on the roadway, it's just, there's nothing you can see. You can only see maybe a couple feet, maybe 10, 20, 30 feet ahead of you. That's the type of listening experience I just had with Heartbreak on the Mojo. But imagine now if you're driving and the fog starts dissipating. And all of a sudden, instead of seeing up to 20 feet, you're now be able to see up to half a mile or a full mile ahead of you. That's the type of differentiation I'm talking about between the Cobalt and the Mojo with respect to this specific song. Okay, so let's go to Superposition by Young the Giant. This is a male-centric song. We're going to switch back to the Cobalt. And let's start. Volume remains at 35%. I hear the drum. I hear the string instrument. Good separation between the two. There's a bass guitar playing in the background, and it's not distorting any of the other frequencies. It's very muted in the background somewhere. Male vocal is clear, unmuddied. At this portion of the song where you hear the drum, the bass guitar, and the string instrument. Even when that bass guitar is playing, it's not interfering with the vocals at all. Smooth, no sibilance to the vocals. Now the backup vocalists are in. I hear at least two vocalists. I can't pinpoint if there's more than two, though. At least two. So when they say, I want you to want me, there seems to be a sense that there is possibly more than two. There are possibly more than two vocalists. But that separation simply isn't enough for me to say for definitively there are more than two. No distortion whatsoever with that bass instrument into the vocals. Now, whereas with Chris Serro, it sounded like the vocalists were several steps behind, 2 steps, 3 steps behind the music mix, the instruments on the soundstage. With this song, it sounds like that the vocals are actually at least a step, probably 2 steps ahead of the music mix of the instruments. And when everything is playing, you can clearly hear the vocals. Nothing is distorting them. Okay, so let's now switch to the Mojo. And let's start again. Volume is still double green. I could say that that bass instrument is a little bit louder on the Mojo, a little bit more present. Now you may say, maybe that's because the volumes are not equally matched. Well, it's hard to do with colors, how to match volume precisely, but this is as close as I can get it. More narrowed soundstage. Even with the bass instrument playing, I don't hear any distortion into the mids. But any second now, the song is going to ramp up in volume. I can't say that there are two vocalists right now. I can say there's one. It sounds like the primary vocalist and his mix was copied and pasted on itself during the mastering process. With the bass guitar, the drum, and the string instrument all playing together, the bass guitar and the drum kind of meld together a little bit. The separation between the instruments is not as clean as it is on the Cobalt, but I think it's a small difference. Now the song's going to start ramping up again. I still can't hear more than one vocalist. It's the primary vocalist and his lyrics were copied and pasted in the editing program on top of each other. That's just the way it's being presented. All right. What I can say is that the bass instrument is not interfering with the vocals in this song. What I also can say is that the vocals still sound ahead of the instruments, but not as cleanly as it was presented on the Cobalt. The separation amongst everything on the Cobalt was slightly better than on the Mojo. Now, this is a slight difference, and in my opinion, if you may or may not be able to notice depending on the song, but doing an A and B test, I think I can say with confidence that the Cobalt has better differentiation between the instruments and better definition of the vocals when all the instruments are playing. The Mojo does have separation of the instruments, but it's not as clean and clear in my opinion. Part of the reason is, once again, because it's a closed off unit, it's a closer soundstage, and second, because it's got bumped up elevated bass response, and it kind of starts melding in with the lower frequencies a little bit. However, thankfully, that bass guitar doesn't seem to interfere with the vocalist. The vocals don't stand out as much as on the Cobalt, but at least the vocals are not distorted. All right, so let's go to our last song, Why Am I Like This? And let's listen on the Cobalt. Oops. Why Am I Like This by Orla Gartland. It starts off with I said a piano. It's not a piano, it's a guitar. Starts off with a guitar, and it sounds like an acoustic guitar. And she starts singing. It's just the guitar and her voice. Very clean separation between the guitar and her voice. I'm going to increase the volume to 35. I don't know why I accidentally turned it in. With the guitar strumming, it's a fast response, so the reverberation from the guitar doesn't linger, and it doesn't seem to interfere with her voice at all. Her voice is clean, undistorted, a little airy, and now you have a bass instrument of some sort. The guitar has stopped playing, the acoustic guitar. Now she keeps saying, "Why am I like this?" over and over with that bass instrument playing. Good clean separation, no interference at all. Now the drummer is playing very lightly. And you have the guitar back in the mix. Excellent separation of the guitar, the drummer, and her voice. No sibilance, no harshness. Her vocal is dead center. And the instruments are taken about a step or two behind her on the soundstage. Okay, so now let's switch to the Mojo. All right, let's start again. Volume is still at double green. The guitar sounds warmer, more closed off, more intimate immediately to say. Vocal sounds really smooth. It sounds really intimate. So the biggest difference I can tell immediately is that it seems as if it's a much more intimate presentation, like I'm standing in a small room, right? It's a room that'll hold 50 or 60 people, and she's on the stage singing, and there's somebody playing the guitar, and it's a very nice, intimate experience. Whereas on the Cobalt, it was much more open, a little more airy. Now the bass instrument is playing. Still good separation between the bass and the vocalist. Now there's the guitar playing again, the bass instrument, the drum, and her voice. Good separation between the instruments generally and her voice. She's easily understandable. Now the drum is playing a little bit harder. And I have to say the drum sounds about shoulder to shoulder to her voice. And there's a lingering reverberation with her voice because of that drum. So here's what happens when the drum starts playing with more emphasis. Instead of being a step or two behind her, it takes equal position to her voice. And that drum resonance lasts a little bit longer than it seemed to on the Cobalt. That starts melding in with her voice. Now, the voice is still understandable. It's not as if it was on Chris Serro's song, Heartbreak, where the instrument came in, then the bass came in and just destroyed the vocals. It's not that. It's just that it starts melding with her vocals a little bit, and that clean, hard separation is simply not present. Now, that may be a very pleasant experience for you, depending on the song. On this song, it neither hurts nor helps it. It's just a detail that I think I was able to find. Okay, so let's talk about the conclusion regarding the mids. This has been consistent between the Mojo and the Cobalt. The Cobalt is simply an airier presentation to the music overall. The Mojo has a more closed off presentation, more narrow soundstage. and in some respects, more intimate, depending on the particular song. Now, there are some songs that are going to benefit from that more intimate presentation. Songs like Why Am I Like This, where it starts off with an acoustic guitar and just her singing. It's just a very beautiful experience, subjectively speaking. And when you compare that with something completely different like Heartbreak, which has much more synthesis and much more electrical mojo going on in the mix, and the vocals are not ahead of the instruments, but they're taking a back seat, the vocals start getting destroyed on the mojo when the bass comes up. Now, the vocals didn't get destroyed in Why Am I Like This when the drummer started drumming a little harder. It started melding with her voice a little bit more. Whether that's a pleasant or unpleasant experience is down to the individual. With superposition, I thought that both devices did fairly well. It's just a slightly different presentation of the music. The Mojo didn't allow the voice to be, throughout the song, ahead of the instruments as the Cobalt did. It just seemed to be bringing the vocals back a little bit closer when the bass was playing. So that's my conclusion regarding the two devices. It just comes down to preference. Do you prefer to have a slightly more airy, more wide, a little bit cleaner presentation? Then the Cobalt is of consideration. If you want a more intimate experience and you don't really care about having all the detail and you don't care about having separation of instruments and hard separation, then the Mojo might be something that you want to consider. I hope this has been of some help, and I hope that you will continue to watch this series as we progress into the next video, which will be the Mojo versus the Cobalt on the treble response. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for participating. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below. If you want to request a review, please look into the description below. That'll have my review request form. Please fill that out and submit it, and I will get to your request as soon as I can. Finally, I'm on Patreon. If any of you would be kind enough to help me keep this channel going, every little bit helps. I have 2 patrons currently, and they're very fantastic and nice and generous with their hard-earned money and giving that little bit of their money towards me per month. If anyone would like to care to contribute, I'd be very thankful. And if not, well, I thank you regardless for participating and subscribing. I hope all of you have a wonderful Sunday.